Hello everyone, welcome along to Racing Weekly. I'm Rishi Persad. This show is brought to you by Oddschecker in association with Bet365. Delighted to welcome back once again Sam Turner, but particularly welcoming a very special guest to the show, someone that I've known for a very long time, someone I consider a friend, but also I was very lucky to have her as a colleague. Tanya Stevenson is joining us. Now Tanya, you were supposed to come into the studio today, but disaster struck with the train. Are you all right up there?
Yeah, all fine. I just feel sorry for everyone that's been affected. There's been some cables, signalling cables that have gone missing between a crucial area, Doncaster and Retford. So I should think lots and lots of people have been affected this morning. The word cancelled was everywhere at the station at York, and it prevented me to come and actually being with the pair of you. So it's a real shame.
But luckily enough, magic, we've got you on to talk about what we've seen over the weekend in particular. But Sam and I would probably like to get a little, and for people watching the show, a little bit more about you. I mean, luckily enough, I've, as I said, had the chance to work with you tons, but you've been involved with betting, with horse racing, greyhounds. I imagine as soon as you could learn to speak.
Yeah, definitely so. Bilingual, Rishi. I could speak betting and English as soon as I was born. The family business had been on-course bookmaking, so the maths have been very good. We have pitches at not only greyhound tracks, but quite a few tracks around the country, from Folkestone, which sadly no longer exists, the likes of Fontwell, Plumpton, right up to Aintree and Chester and York. So countrywide there was bookmaker pitches. So I've been very lucky that horse racing has been my life for a very, very long time.
And one thing that a lot of people will know you for was being part of the Channel 4 team, being alongside Big Mac, John McCrick. I mean, those were some great days for terrestrial coverage of the sport.
Yeah, golden era for sport, because horse racing was just so colourful, so many characters on and off the course, and Big Mac being one of them. I was so privileged to be able to stand alongside him. But I think there's not enough of people like Mac now, because a sport or an industry or an organisation is only as good as the credibility of those that hold it to account and the constructive criticism of those that hold it to account, of which Mac did so much analytical journalism. And although sometimes he was eccentric and outlandish, there was other times where, of course, he was a top-class journalist, which people forget. He'd done so much investigative journalism into things that he was holding the sport to account on. He was the mouthpiece for punters, and that's sadly lacking now, because we have sort of so sterile in a fact that we're kind of living in an automated era where we don't hold to account, or haven't got time as well to listen to what would be sensible. But standing alongside Mac, you could say many stories and anecdotes, but it was a privilege, because you didn't know what was going to happen next. As much you would know that as much as anything, Rishi, because that's what made him great. And it's such a privilege, and so many meetings, the big meetings and the small meetings I've been to, helps me look in a weekend that we saw this weekend, which was a phenomenal weekend. Actually, it's excellent to be covering that with you this weekend, but then look ahead to see what might happen at the festival and at Aintree and meetings beyond that.
Other than his long-suffering wife, T, you probably spent more time with Mac over a period of time than anybody else. What was he like as a character to work with?
Oh, he's fantastic. He was very sympathetic, very motivational, very critical in a constructive way. He had racing at his heart. He was very charitable, and he was just so encouraging to everyone, not only me, but also very generous and giving of his time, because many people see the arm waving and the sort of outbursts when the punters were sort of pushing and shoving us when we were in front of camera, but what they didn't see, and if you're sort of given a warning how long before you'd be in front of camera. And so he was geeing them up and motivating them to get their time on air and give a big old cheer. But no, he was the voice of the punter, Sam, and he was very as mentioned, generous as well. So there was many times I would go with Booby and, or I should say, Jenny McCurrick and Mac to the cricket. He just loved his cricket. He was a passionate and devoted fan of cricket, and of course he loved his racing. He was a very, very shrewd judge, which people may or may not have seen. He was very discreet of who he fancied, or indeed of his betting, but he was very, very shrewd judge. And he also loved another passion of mine, NFL, and he loved the greyhound racing as well. But yeah, he just so charitable. As we saw when we saw him on the likes of Big Brother and Wife Swap, a big chunk of that appearance money went to charity.
His on-screen persona was a great deal different from his off-screen persona, wasn't it?
Yes, he was a lot quieter, a lot studious when he was not in front of the camera. He just knew how to be kind of a pantomime villain. So as soon as the camera was on, he knew how to be an actor, and he knew how to react and be animated and kind of be the devil's advocate. So a lot of things that we might wanted to say and just didn't want to cause a storm, Matt did say it, but in a constructive manner, or sometimes not a constructive manner. But he was very, very conscientious. He wanted everyone to have like a right to reply. But the means was to say those statements and see what reaction he would get. And then he would soon be fair and balanced if there was an argument against whatever he said. But he just needed things to be aired. And he was just so much fun.
Where obviously you and he spent many an hour in the ring, Towns, and that's one area I'd like to talk about. You know, obviously you have seen the transformation of the betting industry, of the ring in particular, from, let's say, 30 years ago to what it is now. I mean, we haven't got enough time, so I'm wary of how much we can fit in this conversation. But just your own opinion of where you feel betting has gone in the UK.
My own opinion. Well, when we had pitches, this was you can go a little bit further back than 30 years ago, but you had to have instinct. You didn't have what we call the exchange, or you didn't have Betfair now. You didn't have. And the likes of Bet365 would be more influential in those days gone by, had they have been about. When you pitched up, you had to use your own instinct, your own discretion of what prices. You had to have an opinion because there wasn't an opinion already made for you. And also it was very hard to refuse bets. You took the bets and then you just ran off and tried to hedge the back. And so if the off-course market came to the on-course market, it may or may not have an influence depending on what meeting you're at. So if we're stood at a quiet, smaller meeting, it would be more influential if you stood at a Cheltenham festival when the off-course market came in, maybe with a multiple. It would have to have a multiple. If a jockey or a trainer had 2 or 3 more winners, then it would take quite a lot to shorten the market, but then you would be proactive and ready for that sort of thing. Then as soon as the advent of the exchanges, that then took out the discretion and intuitiveness. When you came to the racecourse, it was a different dynamic. We didn't have pitches then. We moved away from that. We were doing different jobs then. That was an SP man, or was reporting all the betting shows to the betting shops, and thus I was more with Sis sending all the betting shows to the betting shops, and then with Channel 4. But it then became more automated, and your business model had to change, or needed to change, because it was silly going against the exchanges. Or was it? I mean, looking back now, when the liquidity has gone a lot now with the exchanges and there's no SP reported from the course, you could kind of be back to a normal bookmaker, say normal, more orthodox, where you were before the exchanges. You could offer value. You need to use your instinct more, but of course you have the benefit of having the exchange now to hedge into, which we didn't have before. So a lot of the discretion has gone into it. I'm afraid there is a lot of it's kind of a conveyor belt of prices, isn't it? I know that the off-course the on-course would disagree with that, but they don't differentiate from one another enough. And we would offer a quarter the odd 16 runner handicaps because the value was there to offer the each way terms. That's gone now, which, I mean, they offer that, I think, on 21 runners or more. I mean, it is a real shame. I mean, the punters couldn't be in a better position with the off-course market. We are more minded to be more accessible on the tablets and online. We've never been in a better position in that respect as punters, but it comes as a cost. Sometimes we can't get enough on as much as we want to get on. Sometimes we can't get on at all. Sometimes the value isn't there for us. Sometimes the value is too big. I was going to speak about some value coming up in the Champion Chase, which we're going to speak out of the Tingle Creek, and how as bookmakers they may look at it. And as bookmakers as such, in 30 years ago, you kind of had to be punters yourself, because you kind of had to pick on a couple of horses that you'd want on your side going into the race, and then stand and look at the race itself or listen to the commentator and think whether you're going to put bread on the table. And that's where it become more exciting. Whereas these days, you potentially look into how much you want to show profit, whether that be a £10 a race or a bit more. The dynamic is so much changed because of the exchanges and the wonderful offers and concessions you can get from the off-course market.
Absolutely, yeah. The whole dynamic of betting's changed so much in 20 years. It's changed in 10. It's probably changed in 5, to be honest, with the liquidity on the exchanges disappearing.
I would love to be able to talk to you more about that, Tans. But the one last thing before we move on and talk about what we've seen this weekend. One last thing, you have done. You've been since I've known you. You've been floor manager on the Greyhounds with Sky. I mean, I shared that role with you at separate locations at those days, and then obviously working with Channel 4. You work with ITV at the moment. I mean, is it possible to say that, you know, the Channel 4 one was the best of them all because you had the chance to work with Big Mac, and those were, as I said before, sort of like glory days for the way racing was covered?
Never mind Big Mac, she got to sit next to me on the morning line at least twice.
I did.
Wow. Hang on, that wasn't included in the notes here, Tans. I'm going to have to rewrite that.
And you still carried on working even after those mornings.
Yeah, no, they were the glory days, Channel 4. I was very, very privileged to work alongside some great people like yourself, Rishi, and of course John McCurrick. But of course, as well, television has adapted so differently now. We had kind of a free rein to what we wanted to say and what we wanted to speak and what we were able to do. But because I think that we got, as much as we got more coverage, there's less time to say bits and pieces. And I appreciate that just as much as anything now, because although I'm with ITV doing the stats, I always just sit behind the camera as a producer. I've done that for a couple of years now for Racing Post Greyhound TV. So you get to appreciate what the time that is available and there isn't. But we had a golden era. We had a golden era of horses. We had bigger fields. It was we had bigger fields. We had a bigger depth of good horses to deal with. At the moment, that's a sticking point. But I think this weekend, though, may have given us a little bit of a golden light to say that might be changing in a couple of seasons.
Well, on that note, let's start off by looking back at the Tingle Creek. Obviously, the headlines out of that is that Edwardstone is a serious 2-mile chaser, and those people who doubted the form of the novice chasers last season are clearly in the wrong camp. Shishkin, question marks about where he goes in the future. Those would be the two things that emerge out of that. Tans, what's your take?
I think it was a very good race indeed. You had the course specialist in the race in Grenadine, who was going to set an enormous standard. He's a solid, reliable, very, very good 2-mile chaser, certainly, and you're going to tackle Grenadine at his home. You also had the imponderable in Shishkin, because we know how high he can get in his rating, but we hadn't seen whether we were left wondering prior to the race how good he'd be, because had he come into the race in his imperious self, he wouldn't have been 5-4 evens. He'd have been a lot shorter, even with the likes of Edwardstone and Grenadine in the race. We also had Gentleman de Me, who for me is a horse that waits until the turn of the year. He's seen best in that race. And then we've got Edwardstone, who Alan King had missed a couple of engagements, which is fair enough. He was coming to Sandown and setting down his standard by saying, I missed the engagement, but I wasn't frightened of taking anything on. And certainly he wasn't. And it was almost, it's just so smooth the way he glided over the railway fences. And it was so brilliant to see how he just glided past Grenadine, because that is your yardstick. Shishkin being beaten is another scenario, because there's always sensationalizes, and it's a real shame, because sometimes you talk too much about Shishkin being beaten rather than giving the recognition to Edwardstone. And going into the champion chase, I would have to say Edwardstone would possibly be the one to beat. I know how good Energumame is, but what more does Edwardstone need to do now, because he's shown how good he is at different tracks, which is so important, the quickness and the lightning quickness of the railway fences, and how good he is when dealing with the undulations at the fest and the all hullabaloo at the festival. He's equally adept at both. He's a top 2 mile chaser, and he deserves a higher rating than he's going to get.
He's 5-2 with Bet365 for the champion chase. Obviously, Shishkin has gone out massively, 16-1 Bet365 for the champion chase. But connections are saying step up in trip for sure, 5-1 for the Ryanair, 33-1 for the Gold Cup. Just going to ask you one thing, Sam. Part of me is slightly loath to do this, but it's been something that's come out in the last 24 hours or so about, because of Edwardstone's, profile, one of our colleagues has labelled him as dull.
Really?
Says mega talented, but dull.
I
find it hard to see where the dullness comes from, but
he's exceptional, isn't he? If that had been a Willie Mullins horse that had bolted up by 6 or 7 lengths, who would be calling him dull on that occasion? Who's labelled him dull?
I don't think. Do we need to say?
Have a good guess. I thought he was exceptional on Saturday. Obviously, I don't think that's telling anything they didn't already see. He's 5 from 5 right-handed. He jumps beautifully. He's won every time over fences when he stood up. Yeah. Apart from that one
where he would have won had he got brought down.
He got brought down at Warwick. He unseated, and then he went over the top probably at Aintree. 8 from 16, Tom Cannon. I say he's really versatile, hardy, durable, good jumper.
But he travels nicely, jumps really nicely, as you say, and he's got a turn of foot. There's nothing dull about him, is there, Tans?
No.
And that's pretty much it.
In a word, yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing dull about him.
Is he only dull because he just wins, or because a certain correspondent analyst hasn't backed him, hasn't tipped him enough? You know what I mean?
I just found that
he's dull. He's pretty functional, efficient, proficient.
The reason why I brought it up was because after that, and obviously went out on social media, quite a lot of people, well, not a lot, but a number of people said, "I understand what you mean," and I still didn't understand what they meant. I don't get it.
So, all right, his time was a second quicker than John Bon. John Bon was quicker from the pond fence by about 7 or 8 lengths. Yeah. And on the circuit by something similar as well, even though he's probably 5 lengths slower overall. So John Bon has got that touch of brilliance and that excitement. But isn't the only reason Edwardstone is perceived to be dull possibly because of the way that he's marketed by people like...
Maybe the fact that
the analyst in question?
He's relatively old in terms of a horse that's just gone from novice chase into open company. Maybe it's because he was okay over hurdles, but much better. I don't know.
He's been around a bit, hadn't he?
Yeah.
He'd been around a bit. He'd got that experience from hurdles. He'd run in a number of handicap hurdles, of which I backed him in 95% of them. He hadn't won many of them. Yeah. And that's probably, he hasn't got that sexy profile. But he looks a different horse.
Yeah, nothing dull about him. No. We'll come back to Sandown in just a moment to talk about John Bon, but we should focus on the big news story really yesterday, Tanya, and that of course was Honeysuckle's unbeaten run coming to an end. I still thought for a first run of the season it wasn't too bad. I mean, up until the second to last it was all going to plan. Then for whatever reason maybe it was she wasn't quite right or she wasn't fit enough. I don't know. It's all up in the air. Connections have used the word disappointing. What was your take on the Hatton's Grace?
I suppose everyone says it's disappointing because she's got beaten, because the expectancy is that she just is a win machine, having watched the race closely, and having backed Echoes in the Rain going into that race, who was travelling just as well as Teahupoo going into the last, where Echoes in the Rain took that horrific fall. At that point, Honeysuckle turning for home, Rachel manoeuvred her into position. She did look even more diminutive than normal when she was manoeuvred into that position, when she's got Classical Dream and Teahupoo on the outside. And for one moment, I thought Classical Dream was going to win, and Teahupoo's come round and just snatched it on the line. But the focus on the attention was more of Honeysuckle getting beaten, yet when she was overtaken, I thought she's going to get beaten an enormous amount of distance here, 2, 3, 4 lengths, but she rallied and came again, which said to me that there is certainly more to come, not to be alarmist. This is a race beautifully set up for Teahupoo, who's got that one little burst of speed and had a lovely slipstream to sit on behind Classical Dream. Going towards March, I would be concerned as well whether Teahupoo would be ideal for Cheltenham. We saw that in that exact time in spring last year, never beat a horse home. I think it finished 9th of 9 and then 10th of 10, Teahupoo. Whereas, and also yesterday, Gordon Elliott was just having winner after winner after winner after winner. And that comes into account, as we saw by Venetia Williams on Saturday. You know, before that, there was no winners at all coming. It might be a quiet period for Henry de Bromhead. I wouldn't give up on Honeysuckle yet, but there is the realist in me that I wouldn't give up in retiring her, but she's got to improve lengths and beyond lengths that's her top rating to even get near Constitution Hill.
Yeah, he was now 1-3 for the champion hurdle, and she is out to 8-1 with Bet365.
Well, a bit like you when that bowls coverage, broke the first one that you did, and it wasn't great. It wasn't your finest hour, was it?
Pretty good.
Rumours of your retirement were premature. Then you bounced back in great style. And
20
I'm pretty
years
convinced
later.
Honeysuckle can as well. I mean, there's a couple of mitigating factors for me. It poured down yesterday at Fairyhouse. The going allowance was really, really deep. She went from looking the winner 2 out to being swamped after the second last. 1 or 2 of the de Bromhead horses just haven't fired on their first start, have they? A Plutard,
absolutely.
Honeysuckle, Bob Ollinger travelled.
And similar to Honeysuckle, he travelled and then didn't. Now, there's obviously a caveat about Bob Ollinger, but there have been a few reverses for the.
Yeah, so you can sort of make some sense of the performance afterwards, can't you? So I think rumours of a retirement are pretty premature.
She's still a great champion.
Absolutely.
Regardless. And
right.
If she hadn't had a completely unbeaten run and had come back and run like that first time up with all the conditions that you'd say that was an encouraging return.
Yeah.
And Cheltenham in March, the champion hurdle would be a big target. It's the combination of having Constitution Hill hanging over her, plus the fact that obviously there's the age. She is advancing on in years. He's the young pretender. But overall, I don't think there's no need to be disappointed, other than, it's disappointing that she's lost her unbeaten record, but that's if you think unbeaten records are all that matters in the sport.
Yeah, she's been beaten 2 3/4 lengths, not 12 3/4.
No.
So I think it's a bit premature to start giving up on her just yet. Now, whether she can get to the level that Constitution Hill can and break track records at Cheltenham and win fighting fifths by 12 lengths is open to question for me. But she still deserves to be around.
A word for Teahupoo, who's now 16-1 for the champion hurdle, and Classical Dream 5s for the stayers. Tans, many clouds chase.
Oh, brilliant.
Brilliant indeed, because unusually, I'll say, the Grand National was a bit of a stepping stone for Noble Yates, who's, I think, he's clearly a Gold Cup horse. Where he fits on the level of Gold Cup horse. I'd love to hear your thoughts after that performance on Saturday.
Oh, it's a fantastic race, wasn't it? Taking the Gold Cup thoughts aside, normally the many clouds chase or some chases we've seen have been scuppered by low sun and fences have come out and we haven't seen competitive, proper chase, such as we did. It was a good, honest pace. We had a Hoi Senior out there, Dasher Drasher out there. It was just fantastic, wasn't it? And at one point, you thought that Sounds Russian was travelling well, but suddenly Noble Yates went from sort of looking a little bit tentative and hesitant or hitting a flat spot, and then a motor of acceleration. And I thought for Noble Yates, I don't know what everyone else thought, that the Mildmay course might be a little bit too tight for Noble Yates, because you get that into that frame of thought, having won a Grand National. You think a course such as a Mildmay course may be a bit fast and tight. You would kind of never dream of running a Noble Yates, or maybe you would at a Wincanton or a Huntingdon. Yet that frame of thought changed suddenly when you saw that burst of acceleration from Noble Yates, and it properly came into the Gold Cup betting, because we are struggling to get any traction at the top of the market for a Gold Cup. We saw, unfortunately, a Plutard pull up in the chase at Haydock, and then beyond that, we really are struggling. Suddenly, we saw Noble Yates with that acceleration getting a good mark, a good rating for who he beat and how, and the pace of the race. So Noble Yates bona fide comes into the Gold Cup reckoning, because suddenly you're sitting up and taking note. And it's a rare thing to go the other way round. Normally you have all the pondering and discussion and speculation about should you put a Gold Cup winner in a Grand National. Now we're going to do it the other way round. Yet this one does look to have so much ability off the back of that run on a Mildmay course, which is fast and tight, and to accelerate off of a pace like that is a treat to watch.
Well, he is 12-1 for the Gold Cup with Bet365. Also, Sam, it's worth mentioning that 4 of the top 6 for the Gold Cup with Bet365 the betting are British runners.
Yeah.
And one of the top 6 includes Plutard, who of course has to bounce back from a pretty disappointing return. So first of all, your thoughts on Noble Yates. A word about Ahoy Senior as well, because it seems as if he's got some... Well, he's not going to be a Gold Cup horse.
No, I mean the jumps over the first 2 were rather hairy, weren't they, to say the least.
Kept going right as well.
I know, and he has done that before though, hasn't he? So he drifted right and ran down his fences a little bit. I was astonished by Noble Yates, to be honest. His legs were going quicker at the line than they were at any point during the race. And the only staying chaser I've seen that happen to recently is a Plutard, I must admit, in the Gold Cup.
Yeah.
You know, literally, I know it's sometimes exaggerated by other horses decelerating, and Ahoy Senior and Dasher Drasher had been at it from quite a long way out. But yeah, it was quite extraordinary performance, really. And he's sort of laid the ghost of Grand National winners that don't not necessarily do a great deal.
Yeah.
Obviously, won at Wexford. Interesting that Sean Bowen went over to ride him at Wexford as well. They were keen to build up that association with Sean, and that paid dividends on Saturday. It was a tremendous performance. The overall speed figure was really strong, and he was, I think, 10 lengths quicker than Brave Shashka, who ran over 2.5 miles on the circuit as well. So the data backs up the visuals.
Oh, I love the run as well of Sounds Russian behind. I think there'd be a good prize for Sounds Russian at some point in the season. Also, Tanya, at Aintree, worth mentioning, I'm trying to find out whether there's a B&B at the Skeltons. I'd love to check in there for a week just to...
It's like Martinstown, it's the place that refreshes, isn't it?
I mean, what a spell they are having. And another big one with Ashdown Lad.
Yeah, over the big old fences. It was lovely, a lovely smooth race to see. I think everyone's looking in now at these races and seeing the horses that are specialist over the spruce fences. Ashdown Lad, though, had run well coming into this race, and it was good to see him in positioned well, because in the Beecher Chase, or in any race at Aintree over those big spruce fences, you don't necessarily come from too far behind, and it was relatively up there from the start. You had Geskill, another Aintree horse who just got beaten in a photo in the Grand Sefton. Percussions backed up that run. Fortescue was the horse that was last with about 6 fences to jump and then come through for a place. And then also in the race, I'm looking here, Cloth Cat ran a superb race. But looking at the race, it doesn't normally or necessarily throw up a Grand National winner. It normally throws up horses that run well over the fences. So you're looking towards Tophams, you're looking towards Grand Seftons and the Beach Chase next year. So Sandown Lad wouldn't be my selection for the Grand National. I think I saw that the week before in the race that Dan Skelton won with Lamilos, but certainly you jot down your guess skills, your percussions, and indeed Ashdown Lad, who just waltz around those big spruce fences as if they were just normal chase fences. I don't think for me I'd be going to back him for the Grand National, but I would give him the utmost respect if he went there. It's just not a race, if you look at the stats, that's thrown up Grand National winners.
Fair enough. He is 20-1 for the Grand National. Noble Yates is currently the 10-1 favourite. We might see Delta work this weekend or Friday at Cheltenham. Do you have a view on that race, Sam, or do you want to move it on?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's good enough to produce a national winner, but I thought there was a couple of performances of credit. Fortescue, when he goes back right-handed, maybe Kempton over Christmas if that didn't come too quickly. Or maybe Ascot, February, he won that 3-mile chase there, I think, last year. Those two races might be races for him. Thought Hill 16 ran quite a nice national trial for a horse that might be 33, 40, 50 on the day. He stuck on quite well, looked as though he really wants to step up in trip. So I thought that was a fair effort from him in the end.
Okay. Let's head back to Sandown if we can, Tanya. John Bon is, 2 from 2 over fences, and he is some exciting young chaser. Physically, he's a magnificent looking individual. We had Ken Pitterson on Racing Weekly just recently, and he was talking about the horse that struck him most so far this season, and he wanted to be in the paddock to see him at Sandown. He was in the paddock, and he was really taken by the progress he just made from Warwick to Sandown physically, but also, I mean, he is pretty efficient over those fences. He's had for a novice to jump around Warwick and Sandown. I think that says a lot.
Yeah, it's very, very tricky to jump around Warwick, and indeed he's done Sandown as well, as you said. I'm gutted I didn't have the privilege to see him up close at Sandown. I would have loved to, but I do admire the way he jumped around Warwick. And horses that have done so, what they have then gone on to do in the future. He's gone and landed another Grade 1, has John Bon, this time over the bigger obstacles. And he has a good yardstick, and I don't want people to kind of dismiss this. This yardstick is in Boot Hill, and Boot Hill should get some real recognition here, because Boot Hill had won a good race at Ascot, and then he's come on, and in between the second last and the last, Boot Hill went and chased after John Bon and really went for it and closed that gap to, I think, about 4 lengths or so. So fair play to Boot Hill. So they've obviously got kind of thoughts of running in these graded chases, and quite rightly too, because I think we're going to see with John Bon something really, really special, and for Boot Hill to get within 8 lengths. And I don't think after the last Boot Hill's then continued that chase, not that he would reduce the deficit in any shape, but what he has done, Boot Hill, has given a real solid rating to John Bon's form, because Boot Hill's going to continue to improve. He's going to be no worse than 8 lengths behind John Bon, but the pair of them are very good. I think John Bon's a superstar. Boot Hill is a horse that should get much more recognition than it has. They set up a beautiful kind of what we thought was a 4-runner race, and in fairness, John Bon contracted, I think, to 2-11 favourite in the end, and quite rightly it was that price. You now look forward and you think, well, who on earth is going to get close to John Bon now? Boot Hill continues on the up and up, but John Bon looks something really, really special.
Yeah, he's 6-4 for the Arkle. I've been crabbing the 2-1 that was offered after Warwick, but I mean, and I put myself in the bookmaker's position saying, what prize would I have? I wouldn't really want to take any bets on because he looks so good. El Fabiello, 6-1, obviously he got close to him at Aintree. So Gerhard, 8-1. We don't know when he's going to see him. Appreciate it, 8-1. Phil Dore, 10s. I mean, if you fancy Boot Hill for the Arkle, each way he's 33-1. I thought he ran a fine race. But
yeah,
how good a novice after 2 runs at Sandown and at Warwick is John Bond?
I think we're talking an exceptional novice. And as again, you know, I'm not reinventing the wheel by saying that. He's jumped round 2 of the trickiest tracks, I think, for novices in Warwick, where they jumped 7 fences in the final mile. He was foot perfect there. Very polished again at Sandown over the railways. He loves a ditch, this lad, as well, doesn't he? He attacked that first ditch down the back. And if you crunch a little bit of the data, obviously he was only just over a second slower than Edwardstone in a good renewal of the Tingle Creek. It looked a good renewal going into the race. As I say, 7 or 8 lengths quicker than Edwardstone from the pond fence as well, and on the circuit. I mean, that's just, you know, they're really, really good figures for a novice. And
Incredible.
as T alluded to, Boot Hill sort of ranged up, you know, within a couple of lengths, maybe 3, and he's just put the afterburners on, hasn't he? Minimal pressure from Aidan Coleman, quick and clear, majestically. He's a really, really talented horse, isn't he? And I, for one, can't wait to see him in something like a champion chase.
Well, I know that's already the thought, and why not? You know, why not think about where he could end up?
570k well spent, Rich. That's what I'll say.
I mean, how much would you give for him now?
Well, yeah,
actually,
exactly.
not how much we.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. Say he was owned by you and I think JP would be knocking on the door, and he'd be talking 2-3 million, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, incredible. He is extremely talented. We have lots of other talented horses to reflect on. Obviously, time is always of the essence. The Royal Bond, Tanya, I mean, you can mention Marine Nationale who won. There was the Drinmore, Mighty Potter. I mean, was there anything else that you felt really struck you over the weekend? Lossymouth was another really impressive winner in Ireland that a lot of people were taken by in Richie's colours. What else on the last few days, the last week that you think, I was taken by that?
You've mentioned Mighty Potter. That was just awesome yesterday at Fairyhouse, because the expectation was that there'd be more challenges, and it just jumped as if it had been jumping forever, and that wasn't the case. We'll also mention Lossymouth. I always take note of horses that as soon as they cross the line, they get a quote, and then about 10 minutes later, that quote gets cut in half again. So Lossymouth comes to mind, and that looked very special. And Facile Vega, we'll have to mention Facile Vega, although it was 1-9 to win that race at Fairyhouse, did so with ease, and nothing could get nearer than I think it was something like 16 lengths. And what you do when you concentrate on a 1-9 horse was watch the speed and the economic and classy nature that they hurdle, and that was done superbly. There was nothing to detract from that. So that was another one, Lossymouth, Facile Vega and Mighty Potter for me.
Yeah, I mean, there were loads. I mean, we haven't even mentioned over, you know, the likes of Pictory winning the Peterborough, Henri II.
Yeah. I mean,
Love Envoi.
Paul Nicholls has got like a raft of good novices this year.
Yeah.
And I think the strength of racing, national hunt racing, is in how many good novices we have, or horses that look up to contesting Grade 1s as the season moves on, and also with the seasons to come. And he's got Hermes Allen, Teahupoo, Knowsley Road, Stay Away Faye, and, you know, of course, really good performance over the weekend as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One last talking point from the weekend just gone. Poor Ben Bromley, Towns, mistook the winning post at Sandown on Call Me Lord, held his hands up. But obviously, it's not the first time that's happened at Sandown. Yet people are obviously now saying we've got to do something about it. I don't know. I mean, in fairness, all the other jockeys got it right, and Ben Bromley did admit that he got it wrong. But I don't know what is the solution. Is it simply to just have one winning post?
You can't, can you? Because the alignment.
The configuration says unless you can do something else with it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think they should have one winning post, but not in the way we all think. I thought they were in the past going to remove the other one when it wasn't needed, because Ben Bromley was obviously caught unawares by the winning post that was still stood there. I thought that they were going to, it's kind of a sliding post. They should have a sliding winning post, so you can slide it up or down to what race it's relevant. Because when you look at it, they can't do it because of the angles on the judges box. But you could have a sliding winning post, so you can slide it up and down, so it can take then away that scenario. Ben Bromley won't be the last to do it. It's happened on too many occasions now, and there was utmost sympathy for Ben Bromley, and the amount is what it is. Does seem incredibly unfair, but then of course you've got to think of the punters that have backed on it. But yeah, that's what I do, because when the horses come up to the post, I was watching it, I'm thinking, oh, something's gone wrong there. Someone's set up. But there's two posts you go past. If you take one of them away for when the racing's off, or use a sliding post, so you slide it up to the relevant point it should be, then that lessens the scenario of what we got on Saturday. I mean, this has been happening for as long as I can remember, that people have been penalised for getting the posts wrong. And I honestly thought that they were going to take it away or turn it into a sliding winning post. So this would be a lesser issue.
He got 28 days, 4 of those for a whip offence.
Which is a bit ironic, considering he stood up
yeah.
right out for the last 50 yards.
Do you think the punishment was...
Yeah, I thought that was stiff, but obviously that's probably the entry point or whatever. But when you put it in comparison with Neil Callan, you know, they're both innocent mistakes, obviously, but you know, one is a rather daft mistake to make. I think when you are, you know, you're going out to ride at Kempton, you should know how many circuits you're going to ride.
And again, similar to Ben Bromley, hands up.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. But when you know, you're Ben Bromley and you're riding head down, you know, as you have in a finish, you know, the pro crush is cracking,
everything's
the
down.
blood's up. You know, I can only imagine what it's like. You just ride on instinct, don't you?
Yeah. That's it. Instinct.
You were riding out for 6th or 7th. You were riding.
Strong.
Clinging on was afraid.
I rode out for a very strong 7 of 12. But you know, that's sort of my level, isn't it? Really.
Well, yeah, get him handicapped. That's what I thought you were doing. Anyway,
it never won again. That was a brief look back. Well, so brief look back, a proper look back at what we've seen, and there's been some really quality action. What we are going to do though is have a brief look at what's coming up this weekend. Before we get into our weekend preview, just to let you know of Bet365's ITV racing offer. If you back a winner at 4-1 or more, place a bet on the next live ITV race and get your money back if it loses. That's money back up to £50 and applies to the first single bet placed. Bet restrictions and T's and C's apply. New and eligible customers only. We're going to look ahead now to the international meeting at Cheltenham. And Tanya, the international hurdle, I mean, obviously it's early in the week and we're not entirely familiar with what the likely makeup of the race is going to be. But one thing we do know was that Nigel Twiston-Davies has got a good record in the race. He said very quickly after I Like to Move It won the Greatwood that was the plan. He wants to get this horse lined up for the international. I mean, and this is the kind of opportunity I think the horse has got to take, because realistically he's not going to beat Constitution Hill in the Champion Hurdle.
No, but he is a very, very talented horse, isn't he? He's very good indeed. I'd love to see him turn up in the international. He has the acceleration, he has the ability, and he had that rare quality of carrying a lot of weight and conceding it to others. And you seem to feel that you kind of overlooked him last time he ran at Cheltenham. And I think there was a couple of hurdles missed in that race, but he's pure quality, and I'm scratching my head to think who was going to dare take him on. I can understand why Nigel Twiston-Davies says, yeah, we're going for that race. He's won a race that Nigel won with Khyber Kim, who Nigel had very high up in his thoughts. I would say, I was pondering to think whether Goshen might head there to take on I Like to Move It, but it would be very hard to see anything take him on. I don't think Not So Sleep is going there. He's going to go over a little bit further. And I wonder who, if anything, might come from Ireland. But no, I would want to be on. I'd like to move it in the race on Saturday. It's and it's a good guide going into the Champion Hurdle, but you would fear for him taking on Constitution Hill come March.
I thought, Sam, you mentioned that First Street might
possibly.
be.
Yeah, I mean, the ground looks like being good at Cheltenham. That's the first point we should make. It's good as we record. It's a cold, dry week. I don't see a lot of rain.
Frost covers needed at the end of the week.
Frost covers needed. So I can't see how... I mean, that might stop a bit of moisture in the ground evaporating, might it? If those are down, I suppose. It might sweat a bit under those. So I can't see how it's going to soften quite markedly. That shouldn't really concern. I like to move it. He's got plenty of form on decent ground. Obviously goes around Cheltenham on rails and was very impressive last time. But it might just encourage Nicky Henderson to put First Street in the race. But we don't have those runners at the time. Okay.
And the December Gold Cup, Tanya, as things stand, Midnight River is the favourite. Kel's surprise. It's the Skeltons. So who knows? It could be another big weekend for them. That's the 92 favourite at the moment with Bet365, but of course that's liable to change once we get the 5 days. Ciel de Neige, Il Ridotto, Stolen Silver, Al Dancer, All Potentials, Autumn Couleur. I'll mention one that I quite like at a big price if it does run in the race, and that's Cheltenham, who I thought ran a nice race over hurdles up at Haydock. Not entirely certain that he sees out the trip as well as he does over 2 miles, but he's only run once over 2-3. I'd like to see him run again over this far. So I thought, and he's come down the handicap a little bit. So I'm gonna have a look at Cheltenham. What do you fancy for the race, Tans?
Having a look at the rundown which you mentioned, Midnight River, and sometimes you do focus on the horses that have run well at the November meeting in the big chase at the November meeting. And Midnight River ran well enough, but Al Dancer was brilliant last time out, wasn't it? And the form has worked out well now, as we can argue. The Al Dancer performance in beating Geskill by a nose over the big national fences, and Al Dancer then should have no problems coming to convert that back over at Cheltenham, and is going to put itself up as a big challenger to Midnight River. It's a good chase if it runs as well. Kerry's got a good runner in De Machine, who comes in there, another horse that is in form, and De Machine jumps beautifully and smoothly and fluently and at speed. So there's another one to take into consideration. So going into the race, I understand why Midnight River's favourite, but I'd like to go against it with Al Dancer as my big selection in the race, and just keep an eye out to see if Kerry does run De Machine.
Okay.
Yeah, I like Ciel de Neige if it comes over for Willie Mullins. You know, he's got form with French Dynamite. How he lost that third is grade 3, I'll never know. French Dynamite did him right on the line. Beat Bosserton 4 lengths. Both those performances on good ground as well. Yeah. So I think the ground would be absolutely ideal for him. And there's one sort of down the list which caught my eye a little bit. He hasn't got any Cheltenham form whatsoever, and he's probably a bit inexperienced for a race of this nature. But Fern Hill of Ben Case's, I'm going to take with him at Uttoxeter. Clocked a really good speed figure, and I love the way that he jumped and travelled. And I think he's going to be a big price when he 21.
You're right. That was a very good performance at Uttoxeter. Yeah, 20 to 1 at the moment, but obviously I said that's all liable to change because this is relatively earlier in the week. So that's a look
on the new course as well, I think.
That's a look at the December Gold Cup. Likely to have Delta Work lining up tons in the cross country chase. Now, obviously, we know Delta Work goes well there, but also goes well there. Diesel Dallier won the race last year. There's Back on the Lash, who's got a good record there for the Keithleys. How do you see the cross country chase this week?
Yeah, well, I've started doing the stats for that already, and there's been 5 winning favourites since 2001. It's a race, as you'd expect. It's a bit like anything over the spruce fence. It's a race for specialists. You mentioned last year's winner, Diesel Dallier, will be back. I think Easy's Land is in the entries as well. So horses that run over the fences are back again. I know, having spoken about a Plutard and having spoken about Bollinger and Honeysuckle, we haven't seen the best of the Henry de Bromhead horses on their first run. But Plan of Attack, he's had a run. It wasn't disastrous. Plan of Attack has tackled these fences. He's tackled the big Aintree national fences, and Plan of Attack run could be a huge danger, having had that one run that wasn't a disaster, was a big outsider at Clonmel, and it was over hurdles, might have been kind of set up to come here for this cross-country chase, and it might suit. But of course, yes, we have got to respect Dale to work on that, but I'm trying to seek a little bit of value here.
A plan of attack, a good call.
Back on the lash for me.
Again.
Not figuratively. Yeah, I just thought I liked his comeback run, to be honest, behind Does He Know.
Okay.
What the ground would be like, though, on that cross-country, it might be lively. They might have put a fair bit of water on, haven't they?
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's safe.
Fingers crossed for the cross-country.
Nice.
Did there.
One last race to mention that's happening this week, and it could potentially feature the favourite for the Gold Cup, and that, of course, is Galopin des Champs, who is set to run in the John Durkin. Again, fingers crossed. But Willie Mullins has a whole host of entries in that. Chacun pour soi, Blue Lord, Ferny Hollow, and more. I guess it all depends on whether or not Willie decides to take the wraps off Galopin des Champs, Tanya.
Yeah, it has been a traditional sort of starting point, hasn't it, for Willie, this race, because I tend to be on my travels working when this race is happening and having to look up the stats. But it's key when you see the horses that have won this for Mullins. Jack Adams won it twice. I'm just looking now, I'm cheating. Min's won it on 3 occasions. And in 2020, he had the first, second and third. Listen to this. He had Min, Tornado Flyer and Melon. So it's pretty key who he runs here to whether it be what 3 or 4 he runs, because you sense then that, you know, they're going to go off and do their targets. Like you mentioned, Galopin de Mesnil, that might be running, but Tornado Flyer might be in it. We saw last year it was won by Aloha. So it's certainly a race that you keep an eye on how many Willie runs in this, because he could have the 1, 2, 3.
Very easily.
Yeah, I was really taking with Blue Lord. I thought he settled a little bit better.
I thought he'd come on for it as well.
Yeah, and travelled quite nicely through that race, and was just a little bit more of a comfortable conveyance, I think, rather than being sort of quite so frantic over 2 miles as he had been. So he might be an interesting runner as they step up and trip with him. Fakir Duderie, it'd be great to see him back if we see him indeed. Ferny Hollow. I mean, it's a litany of stars. I'd have thought it'd be a bit sharp for horses like Statler, who might well have other targets in mind for him. But yeah, it looks a phenomenal race, and we see the beast back hopefully in Galopin des Champs.
Yes, I'll refer to a comment that Ken Pitterson made about Galopin des Champs. He said Willie Mullins he's spent time in Willie Mullins' company watching racing, etc. And he said Willie Mullins very rarely gets overexcited about watching horses run. The only 2 horses he's seen Willie Mullins do that for recently have been Facile Vega and Galopin des Champs. Understandably so, in fairness. But when you consider, you know, Allo, State Man, Vauban, etc., those Gerhard.
Not a bad collection, Ferny Hollows of this world.
Yeah, he's therefore, you know, those 2 must be something pretty special. I think that's it in terms of looking ahead with the limited resources that we have at this particular juncture of the week. But I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Tanya very, very much for joining us this morning. You know, I don't want to embarrass you, Tans, but on the race course, or if I ever bump into racing fans and they ask me about the old Channel 4 team, the 2 people they ask me most about, one is John Frankham, understandably so, the greatest. And the other person people ask me about and say, where is she? Love her, is Tanya Stevenson. So people always ask for you. They always want to see you. They want to see you back on the screens. And they always want to know that you're doing well. So I often say, yes, you're doing very well. And so hopefully we'll get to work together many more times in the future. Thanks a lot, Tans.
Bye, Sam. Bye-bye, Rishi. That's really sweet. You're really sweet of everyone, because they all come up and say hello to me, the likes of Weatherby and Carlisle and Ripon and Thirst and Rescar, where I've been recently. And I was at Exeter as well recently. So that's good news, and hope to see everyone very soon. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Rishi. It's been really good fun catching up.
Thank you very much,
Great
Tanya Stevenson. And of course, the odd person also comes up to say, how is...
Don't have him back on again.
The other guy, forgotten his name. Gavin Lynch. How's Gavin Lynch doing?
Thanks. That Turner, is he sweeping the roads yet? That's what they say, isn't it?
No, we love you, Sam. We love you. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of Racing Weekly. This show brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun chatting to Sam and Tanya this morning. If you like what you've heard or watched, you know what to do. Leave us a kind review on Apple Podcasts or in the YouTube section comments. And we'll be back next week previewing the long walk hurdle at Ascot, and we'll have another very special guest, Steve Ryder, who knows a thing or two about tipping winners, will be alongside Sam and myself. But for now, from this episode of Racing Weekly, bye-bye.